Welcome to the Salary Exploitation for Week 6. I'm Jason Gilbo, J Gilbo 11. With me is Russell Clay at Russell J Clay. Taking a look at some salary discrepancies from Week 6. And overall, I think you're looking at a lot of value here, but really not a lot of household names.
The household names are limited, but in terms of, this is going to be a tougher week. I think in terms of Week 5, there were a lot of bye weeks that were fantasy relevant. You look at the Saints, the Seahawks, and that other team that I always forget that has a few players, but whatever. But generally speaking, this is going to be a tougher week to find value. I think you can look at the Chiefs, maybe the Eagles a little bit as well. But overall, going to be a tougher week. We got some ideas for you, but I think we got to let this week simmer a little bit. It is only Monday.
Yeah, it definitely is. We can jump into here first. I think Alex Smith is a good indicator about the type of guys we're dealing with. Do you like his price really across all three sites?
I love Alex Smith this week. I also love his potential stacking options. We'll get into that in a little bit. But obviously, you're looking at Macklin. Obviously, you're looking at Travis Kelce. I think he's cheap enough on DraftKings, 5,700. He's essentially, that Brian Hoyer price range. He was there a few weeks ago against the Steelers, and it was just, pretty easy. Oh, the Chiefs were on bye. That's hilarious. That's the third team. Okay. So Chiefs, Seahawks, and So anyway, Alex Smith, really, really a good chance to hit fantasy value against a Raiders defense that is just trash. They have tons of young talent, but they're not seeming to be able to put it together, and it may come through at some point in the year, but I'm done waiting on them,
Yeah, I think so too. At this point, we're 5 games in. Let's just treat them like they're the bad defense that they really are, maybe. Because they've had their chances against some teams that we expected better from. That hasn't happened yet. Marcus Mariota, you're looking at here, coming off his best week of the season so far, gets another matchup where that certainly could continue.
Yeah, we all played Marcus Mariota in cash across all 3 sites, right? Last week. I get it was against the Dolphins, but generally speaking, you don't expect that from Mariota. Against this Browns team, though, I do think they're going to be able to move the ball. I think you can stack him with Delaney Walker. I think you can, do that running back quarterback stack with Murray and hope, they get a combined 2 or 3 rushing touchdowns. I think you can expect 200 passing yards. This secondary is all over the place. And if he continues to run, a good athlete for a quarterback. So FanDuel, it's going to be tougher to make the argument for him just because he's in that 7,600 grouping where, it's okay. I'm still looking at him, but really I'm looking at him on FantasyDraft and DraftKings.
Yeah, 7,600 is a little pricey. FanDuel did price up kind of those value quarterbacks this week. There's a lot of guys in that $7,000 to kind of $78,000 range. They finally priced up Hoyer, who's $7K, who, he's only been throwing for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns over the last 3 weeks, so it's about damn time.
Yeah, I don't know that I can get behind, paying $800 more on FanDuel for Mariota than Alex Smith at 68. That is so cheap. There are some value wide receivers, but generally speaking, that's pretty darn cheap for a guy who's been a, borderline QB1 the last 3 years now.
You're looking at also, a couple cheap options to pair him with too. So, that's certainly something that you can take a look at.
Definitely.
Running backs, you look at Carlos Hyde, who just kind of consistently getting disrespected here on DraftKings.
Oh, so bad. 5,100. Guys had a touchdown, at least one touchdown, in 4 out of 5 games now, 2 multi-rushing touchdown games. We saw in that Seattle game, he's not game flow dependent. They're still going to continue to run even while, things aren't working out. Buffalo gave up, that long catch to Gurley last week. We saw Carlos Hyde getting involved in the passing game in week 5. I think there's a lot of good things going on in Carlos Hyde's, fantasy production right now. And at 5,100, especially, they're talking about potentially Colin Kaepernick making a return. If that happens, I mean, I know Blaine Gabbert runs a lot, but Kaepernick's certainly the bigger threat there. So, yeah, I like Hyde once again. I know it's Buffalo. I do like their team defense, but overall, I think Hyde's a pretty good matchup. Now, Marcel Darius off suspension last week, didn't play. But if he does return, that's potentially a game changer for this Buffalo run D. They've been okay, but if they get him back, obviously he's an all-pro player. So something to look at and keep in mind. But in play on FanDuel still for me at 75 or 7,300. But I love his price on DraftKings and FantasyDraft.
Yeah, I definitely do too. I was for all the reasons that you mentioned in terms of not really being game flow dependent. Even though Buffalo is the better team, you do expect that. I think that game should be relatively close. Buffalo's not usually the team to blow teams out.
No, definitely not. Other guy here, Darren Sproles. Love the way they're using him. Got tackled down at the 1. In his last game. So I think he's just, he's older, but he's still got that game breaking speed. And at 4,400 on DK and 5,300 on FanDuel, 8,700 on FantasyDraft. It's really getting a lot tougher to find these value running backs week to week, and especially with significant roles. So I'm certainly looking at Sproles.
Yeah, I definitely am too. I mean, I like that price. I mean, anytime you get anyone down here below 5,500 at a running back spot, it doesn't take a ton to return the value, especially when you're paying up at wide receivers, because it does help you kind of get in the Antonio Browns, the Jordy Nelson type tier guys to kind of offset if they do get you to kind of that 10 to 12 point range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just think generally speaking, that Philadelphia offense is really unpredictable.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I think we saw that a lot this week against the Lions. I mean, they didn't really look completely prepared or come off the bye week like I expected.
Yeah, and I guess we'll get into Jordan Matthews here first for wide receivers. I kind of feel like I was playing tennis with the Eagles offense here, and I was like doing well. I was like getting them week to week, and they just aced one on me this week. I mean, I loved Ertz. I loved Jordan Matthews, and they just weren't looking that direction at all. I mean, Ertz only got 3 targets. Jordan Matthews wasn't really involved. I know the offense struggled, but it was like they really spread it out. So, I mean, I hesitantly like Jordan Matthews. I like him more on FanDuel. I think that's a sneaky play there against this Jets team that's allowed a bunch of chunk plays. But generally speaking, yeah, not really looking at them that much. I mean, Washington's allowed a bunch of chunk plays.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm looking here and I just think FanDuel 6,700. I mean, that's a nice price tag. I think DraftKings is really too high for me.
Yeah, no, too high, and especially with some of the other values on DraftKings that open up, especially with PPR, a lot easier to fade, and someone you really don't have to deal with if you don't want to.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, especially on FantasyDraft as well, I'm not touching that price. That's way too expensive for me.
You look into some cheaper guys. I mean, Sammy Coates was the guy you were talking about really all week to kind of deploy with Ben Roethlisberger, had a monster day. Still relatively cheap. I mean, he is up, from last week, of course, as you expected, but another plus matchup for him.
Yeah. Yep. I had a lot of exposure. The only unfortunate thing, I had a good week on FanDuel. The unfortunate thing on DraftKings was as much Coates as I had just as much McKinnon. So, as much as you get proud of yourself for one call, there's always something to punch you in the gut, right?
There is. You can't have it all, Russ.
Can't have it all. So, as we saw, again, the 80-yard touchdown to Coates, freak athlete. I mean, that's just what he's going to be doing. Some weeks he's going to drop, 3 of his targets and have 3 for 43, and other weeks he's going to have I don't think he's Martavis, but he's in the same role. He's a good enough athlete to sort of, blow by the secondary, especially single coverage. So, and he's big enough to out muscle guys in the air. So, yeah, I mean, I love him again. it seems like you're chasing points with that. And while I don't think he's going to get 100 and some odd yards and 2 touchdowns again, it's not chasing. He's just underpriced again. 4,700 on DK, 6,300 on FanDuel. That's kind of been an unlucky number for guys coming off big performances this year, but I think he can break that trend.
Yeah, I definitely do too. And I mean, one, I think still at these prices, it's still low risk enough for me to kind of deploy. You look
Yeah.
at last week, I mean, if he doesn't hit on the long bomb, obviously we saw that. I mean, we saw him have some drops, but overall, I mean, the volume was certainly there.
Volume's there. This Miami team is trembling. They're trembling right now. They're terrified, as would I. I think the full game stack is totally in play again without the Dolphins. So just the Steelers stack, but you just get as many as you can in. And I mean, I guess in some sense, Jesse James is in play as well. If you mention Coates, I think you should mention Jesse James as well as secondary pieces. I think those are the two guys over Wheaton right now, even though Wheaton playing more snaps. And I'm not a Wheaton hater. I'm 1 out of 100 people aren't Wheaton haters. I'm not a Wheaton hater, but in terms of Sammy Coates for him, it's not close.
Yeah, I think from what we've seen, it seems like the Pittsburgh Steelers don't fully even trust Wheaton.
They go to him in the goal line, but generally speaking, yeah, I don't think they want him to have, a huge role, more than maybe 5 or 6 targets a game. I think they like him where he's at,
Yeah.
As far as my last guy, so if you're looking for a guy to really get an advantage in a tournament, especially on FanDuel and FantasyDraft, Chris Conley, I mean, caught 6 or 7 targets against Pittsburgh that week. I know it was a blowout, but you just look at a guy, you look at the min price guys, and it was Cameron Meredith last week, who's super athletic, who can break an 80-yard touchdown for me? It's Chris Conley. I mean, in this matchup, he's going to get at least 5 or 6 targets. I know they've been using him as more of a possession guy so far this year, but he is a guy that can break the tackle and nobody's going to catch, If that one corner misses that tackle, he's literally gone. So, I mean, you saw that play with Sammy Coates for the Steelers last week against the Jets. I mean, that's the type of player Chris Conley is on deep routes. And I know Alex Smith doesn't go deep much, but you just look at super uber athletic, and we talked about it with Jerick McKinnon 2 weeks ago. Chris Conley's literally the most athletic wide receiver in the NFL. He's more athletic than Julio Jones. I know he's not a better receiver than Julio Jones, but that's the type of athlete we're talking about here. So 3,100 on DraftKings, basically min price across all 3 sites. Travis Kelce and Macklin are where you want most of your exposure. But I mean, if you have an Alex Smith and you really like him and you want to make multiple stacks, especially, on smaller, like afternoon slates or something like that, I mean, I think you should certainly give it a look.
So my question to you is Chris Conley a good athlete?
Chris Conley is unbelievable. He is an unbelievable physical specimen. I hope he gets 6 targets, in which case I think really good things are going to happen. So
I like that call. No, I do like that call. And 3,100, I mean, 4,600, those prices, 6K on fantasy draft. It's what do you have to lose at that point when you're building multiple lineups and can fit him in?
And it's Oakland. It's not like, it's Minnesota. It's Oakland, who's been just one miscommunication, 80-yard touchdown. There's also Marquise Lee in that range, but we won't talk about him because I don't want to admit that I actually like him this week. So we'll move on.
Let's save that.
Yeah, moving on.
Yeah. Looking at tight ends here, you talk about Jimmy Graham, who, I mean, relatively average price tag here at 4,900 in comparison to the other tight ends on DraftKings. He's priced up kind of like his old days in New Orleans on FanDuel, but I still think a viable option, in my opinion, across the 3 sites.
I mean, back-to-back 100-yard receiving performances and 4,900. Sure, I'll take the risk that I'm jumping on too late. Against a reasonably weak defense. I think Jimmy Graham is a guy that you can really look at, and I think he's just back. I think he's just fine. And that injury is not something that players come back from, generally speaking, but he's back. He's putting the results out there. I don't see why we wouldn't trust this. And on 4,900, he's going to be a main flex play for me. If not having him on my tight end. If he's not in my tight end, he'll be in my flex at 4,900. There's just no, I mean, other than Carlos Hyde at 51, there's just nobody in that price range that really competes with him. Maybe Sammy Coates at 47, but yeah, tough to fade him on DK.
Yeah, I think so too. And as you mentioned, I think really the flex play is a certain because I mean at this point, Jimmy Graham's basically a wide receiver in terms of his upside and ceiling. So I mean you're using him in the flex, and as you mentioned, Hyde. I think Hyde's going to be a dominant guy in the running back spot to begin with. So, but overall, I mean, you kind of start your lineups off that way. I mean, that's a lot of value with two real high floor, high ceiling guys.
Cash for sure. Yeah. I don't think you want to pivot off him in cash too much, especially with some of the injuries we've been seeing with these tight ends. I mean, Gronk can play, sure, but generally speaking, I like Graham quite a bit, especially on FanDuel too. I'm not afraid to pay up for him.
No, I'm definitely not either. Charles Clay, you talk about next, 2,900 on DraftKings. That's a really nice price tag for someone who's been used quite a bit here since Watkins went down.
Yeah, quite a few catches last week. Looks like they're looking to him quite a bit, especially when Robert Woods can't get going. So I think it's going to go back and forth with those two quite a bit. But 2,900 on DK, not afraid of these prices on FanDuel and FantasyDraft either. So, I mean, if you're looking for a tournament guy and maybe, I think the Bills game stack is in play here. I think you can go McCoy and Charles Clay and Bills D and get away with it. I'm not afraid of that at all. I could definitely see them putting up 30 points on the 49ers. So certainly in play here. Something I'm looking at. There are other options in that range, but he's the guy I felt was the best as of now.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm with you. I think those prices right there. I mean, especially DraftKings is putting Clay into a spot where, 2,900, if you just want to punt the tight end spot, I mean, I'm completely fine with that because I think at this point, you're still looking at about 10 to 12 points from him with the way he's been playing with Watkins out.
Definitely.
So defenses, you talk about the Ravens here first. That's kind of your balanced your cheap guy, across really all three sites bare minimum.
Last week was so easy, and I liked the Vikings, and I plugged them into most of my lineups, but I totally took it for granted because what we're looking at this week is just miserable.
Because the Vikings are on bye.
Both the top end and the value is just all garbage to me. So, I mean, I like the Bills against the 49ers. I think the Ravens, you can look at them against the struggling Eli Manning. I thought yesterday was going to be a big day for him. Something seems up. Odell Beckham salvaged his day at the end there with that crazy catch. I mean, unreal, but Ravens haven't been giving up a lot of yardage. Other than that, really, Isaiah Crowell 80-yard run, there hasn't been that many chunk plays against the Ravens this year. So if they can contain Odell Beckham, keep Sterling Shepard in check, there's no run game. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at.
Yeah, I definitely think so too. I mean, I think if I am going to be paying down, it's going to be one of these teams because, as you mentioned, I don't really feel like paying up for any of the top stuff. One, we don't get the Denver, in the main slate. We don't have Arizona in the main slate. Vikings on bye. So that's three elite defenses that are off the table this week.
Yeah, so I'm cool with the Ravens and Bills, but it's kind of a really lukewarm week for defenses. It might be a week to, swerve and diversify at least much more than last week.
Yeah, I do too. And kind of looking at this Bills, you talked about the Bills stack. I mean, defense, priced up because it's the matchup against the 49ers on DraftKings. FanDuel, still a decent price at 4,800.
Yeah, so I just think we looked at what they did against this, Rams team. Pretty similar matchup this week with the San Francisco team. So I like it. I like it a lot. They're borderline cash for me right now. I wouldn't be afraid to play him in any format.
Yeah, I think so too. I think looking here early in the week, I mean, haven't made my decision truly on defense yet, but anytime you're getting a team that's playing against the Niners, especially at home, that's usually going to be pretty eye appealing.
Definitely.
So that's going to wrap things up with the week 6 salary exploitation. Be sure to head on over to dailyfantasycafe.com, check out our great tools and content.